Hi everyone, I'm Liz Morris with Peppermint Rose Productions, and welcome to Pop Sculpture. In this series, we'll be taking my original character designs and sculpting them into life. We will also be doing that for fan favorites of any kind of pop culture, anything from the 20th century on up till now. Personally, I love anything from Tim Burton, Aardman, Laika, Disney, Hanna Barbera. Speaking of Hanna Barbera, that is actually what we're going to be doing in our first episode here. We're going to take Jinx from Arcane and turn her into a Jetsons 50s character, or actually 60s character. So she's gonna go from a really realistic look into a really clean retro cartoon character aesthetic. I hope you enjoy it. I had so much fun making her, and so come join me in the process and we'll go ahead and dive in. I made this character design as a reference to make the armature. She's a little too skinny in the 2D version for it to translate the way I want, so she'll have a little more volume for her 3D version. Once I've mirrored both sides, I'll bind them together with more wire, including a separate piece for the neck. Next, I'll bulk out her torso with Sculpey ultralight clay. I learned this tip from Adhesive clay, and it's a great one. You can skip this step to avoid the extra bake and just use aluminum foil, but aluminum can poke through the clay, which is annoying. Ultralight provides a smoother surface to add clay onto. Now I'll just bake her at 275 for about 30 minutes. Once the armature is done, I'll start building out her body using ProSculpt polymer clay. ProSculpt is specifically made for making dolls, and I've been using it forever. It was recommended by Patricia Rose, an internationally renowned doll artist. I learned from her DVD tutorials when I was a polymer clay beginner in the early 2000s. To add her left arm, I just add Sculpey oven baked clay adhesive to the wire and slip on the clay. Since the right arm is bent, I cut a slit in the clay, apply it onto the wire, and close the seam around the arm. And it's the same technique for her legs. At this point, I'm just getting basic cylinders onto the wire. Now I can start building up mass in different shapes onto her body. Next, I'll start carving away and refining the shapes. This part is very cathartic for some reason. She was looking a little flat in a few areas, so I'm just building up those shapes. I think it can be a little strange if you're used to just drawing and shifting to a 3D sculpture, but sculpting really helps you think about the volume of your figure, which can actually help improve your anatomy drawing skills. Now it's time to really define her waist. She's a graphic-looking cartoon character, so I want some of the shapes to have a little sharpness. It's getting close, but needs a little more attention. Here I'm going to start making the edge of her sleeve. The Jetsons had this style of clothing where everything was triangular, so I'm going to incorporate that into her design. Okay, it's time to smooth everything out with my flat chisel silicone tool. Once that's done, I'll brush some clay thinner all over her to remove fingerprints, and she's ready for her next bake. Now that her body is baked, it's much easier to add on clothes. I'll start with her halter top. After wrapping strings of clay around her neck and arms, I'll blend all the edges in. With the edges blended, I've added more clay to fill out the rest of her shape. Now I'll just detail the shape of the top using my craft knife and silicone tools. I'm just adding the holes and eyelets for her laces. On go the laces, and I'll just flatten them out. Next, we'll add a thick string of clay and flatten it out to make her belt and suspenders. Jinx has a pouch on the side of her belt, so we'll include that too. And finally, her buckle. For her head, I ran a sheet of clay through my pasta maker on the thickest setting and wrapped it around a ball of aluminum foil. I'll begin by forming the basic shape and building up her cheeks and blending them in. Using my reference, I'll mark out the areas where her eyes, nose, and lips will go. We'll build the cheeks up even more and add her cute little nose. I love adding lips. It really makes the face come alive. In this case, I want her mouth to be somewhat graphic looking, so once I've carved the shape, I'll flatten the top plane out with my rubber and silicone tools. I'll just continue refining until I'm happy with how it looks. As I compare again, it looks like her forehead needs to be built out a bit more. However, getting her forehead situated also meant that her eyes got smeared over, so I'm just redefining where they go. Now I'm just adding her eyes on and blending them in, but I want a fairly defined line around them to keep the graphic style. Finally, I'll spend some time smoothing and refining the face. I want her cheeks to have a crisp edge, so I'm just sharpening them up, along with her forehead. Her head is done, so I'll just brush it with Sculpey clay softener to remove fingerprints and smooth her out before baking. To make her base, I took scrap clay, rolled it out, and used a cookie cutter to make this fun leaf shape that looks a bit mid-century modern. After popping a couple air bubbles, I'm going to cut out a second piece and glue it to the first one with some Bacon Bond. I'll place Jinx where I want her to stand and press down to make a hole for the armature wire. Time to add her hands. I've cut out a mitt and attached it with some liquid clay, and I'll shape and refine the fingers with my craft knife and silicone tools. Now let's start on Jinx's cool hair. I'm using teal-colored Cosclay, which is a specialty clay that becomes flexible after it bakes. I'll add clay conditioner to this because, fair warning, I found Cosclay to be either super soft and sticky or very hard and crumbly like this. I don't think they make this luster line anymore, but I got a series of different colors and they all need clay softener and take about 15 minutes to condition and become workable. However, once it is conditioned, it's pretty easy to work with. The colors definitely bleed, so keep baby wipes on hand. I went through about 1 million during this process. To make the base of her hair, I'm adding clay adhesive and carving out where her ears will go. I think I reverted back to my original polymer clay days when you wouldn't complete the back of the head because that's where the wig hair would be glued in. But no biggie, I'm just going to bulk it out with aluminum foil and add more clay on top. Now I'll roll out a long teardrop shape to make her little coif, if that's what it's called, basically like really long bangs, and just blend it in. Okay, full disclosure, her braids were a real challenge. I've never done braids in polymer clay before and I didn't think it would be this difficult, but because they're so long and I wanted them to have a dynamic pose, they needed armature wire to hold the weight, so it was a matter of figuring out the best way to do that. In this technique, I wrapped clay around 3 pieces of armature wire and then braided the strands together. Now this technique would have worked in theory, except the braids were too big for the size of her head. So I switched to floral wire, and that was just disaster. I even tried using a clay extruder to make even strands. Now, I don't know if you've ever used an extruder before, but I definitely did not have the strength, so that idea got nixed. The final technique I used was to roll out the clay to about the right thickness, then wrap it around the floral wire, all going in the same direction. I repeated the process, but wrapped the strands going in the opposite direction of the first one. Then I pressed the strands together with the starting knot a little higher than the other, so as I went down, they looked like interlocking braids. Next, I cut out some holes in the braids where I'll put her hair cuffs in. I used regular Cosclay for these. With my needle tool, I'll draw the outline for her light blue stripe, which will serve as a guide when I paint it on later. Now the moment of truth. Time to attach her long braids. After plugging them in, I'll finish the hair with a few little creases, clean off her face with some alcohol, and she's ready to bake. Unless you're making like a fairy or an elf, no character is complete without footwear. I'm just making little notches in her heel with my needle tool and continuing the triangular theme for the upper part of her boot. Now I'll brush on some glue and cut out the edge of her pant leg. Then I'll blend it in, thin it out with my craft knife, and refine it until I get the right shape. I'm going to switch gears a little and clean off the blue clay stain on her skin. I really recommend using wet, dry sandpaper since it keeps most of the polymer dust from getting into the air. This process takes a little while, but it will also smooth out fingerprints and any bumpiness in the clay. Once most of the stain is gone, I brush some alcohol all over her face to remove the last of it. I got a lot of it, but I ended up using acetone to finish the job. Both alcohol and acetone will leave your clay cloudy, so just use baby wipes or oil to remove it. Only a couple more things to do before her final bake. I'll get her neck ready and we'll make her little ray gun. This was so much fun to do. I looked at different pictures of retro ray guns for inspiration, but I was really thinking like a combination of Marvin the Martian and the Jetsons style, so I hope I captured that look. Now that we got the little rings, I'm adding floral wire and a little ball of clay to make the tip of the gun. Then finally, a cool 50s looking retro fin. After the gun is baked, I attached it to Jinx's right hand with liquid clay adhesive and detailed her fingers with my needle tool. So, things went a little askew during her first bake. If you'd like to see what went wrong and how I fixed her, I'll be posting a short video on that soon. But for now, let's skip ahead. Next, I'm airbrushing her skin. I've tried to protect her hair by attaching saran wrap or cling film to it with masking tape, which worked fairly well. I'm using Army acrylic paints for almost everything, with the color bleached bone for her skin. I've mixed a little bleached bone with white for her eyes and painting her lips in fey pink. We'll use bulwark brown for her halter top, armbands, gloves, belt, and suspenders. I happen to have almost the exact color match to her hair in Azteca acrylic paint, so I'm going to use that to paint her irises. I want to paint the eyelets on her top and her hair cuffs in metallic gold. So I'll lay down some black paint first, and that will make the gold color pop. Here I'm adding fairy pink to her pants and then Jinx's cool pink and teal nail polish. Her eyebrows and liner were super nerve-wracking, and I had to do some touch-ups later, but I love the way it turned out. Time to add those beautiful metallic gold accents. This took a couple layers, but it turned out really pretty. I'm using Broodmother Purple to paint the stripes in her pants. I've really never been able to paint a straight line, which is probably why I love Tim Burton and like his style so much. And I think non-linear stripes are just more interesting and add so much more character. Though I am trying to follow the shapes of her legs, the stripes will still be a bit wonky, which is of course what we want. Using a little of the teal blue mixed with white, I'll paint the stripe in her bangs. Jinx doesn't have this in her original design, it's just something I added to just give her a little extra character and add to that retro cartoon style. So you may have noticed up until now, she didn't have ears. That is because I literally forgot to add them on before baking her head. So fair warning, I really don't recommend adding ears after the head is baked and painted, just only if you've had a total brain melt the way I did. You can add them after you've baked but haven't painted yet, just rebake the head and ears once more before painting. I've removed the ears to bake separately, then I'll paint and superglue them on later. Now I'm making another detail I forgot earlier, the studs on her belt. Now that the ears have baked, I'll paint them in bleached bone to match her skin. Next, I'll go in with black paint and line her inner ear. To paint the studs, I'll add the black coat first, then silver. I'm super impatient when it comes to waiting for paint to dry, so I'm using a travel hairdryer to help it dry quicker between coats. Before I glue on her studs, I want to repaint all the brown colors. After I originally did the bulwark brown, I thought it would be cool to dry brush copper onto everything, but it took away from the cartoon look. I did the same dry brush effect to the shoes, so I repainted them black instead. We'll add the final touch to her belt buckle and add some fun random cartoon lines. Pink laces, a must for her shoes. And some dark pink liner to separate her top and bottom lips. For her base, I'm using glitter green. This is just a little nod to the Jetsons flying car. We're getting down to the final paint touch-ups. I'll add some gold to the rings on her ray gun, along with some final skin touch-ups. Now let's go back and add those studs to her belt. I'm just carefully dipping the base of each stud into super glue, then pressing it onto her belt until it sticks. This was super fiddly, but thankfully it turned out kinda cool. Now let's add UV resin to her eyes to really give them a nice glossy and domed appearance. This is one of the most satisfying parts. Using a needle tool makes applying the resin very precise, and it can also poke out any tiny air bubbles. And we'll also add a little resin to her nails. For the final touch, I'll add silver trim to her boots on the heel and the eyelets. And now, without further ado, let's meet Jinx Jetson. Okay, so here she is. She's all done. I really had fun making her. She's so colorful, and I just love the way the design worked out. So especially making that ray gun, that was a blast. So anyways, if you really enjoyed today's video, please hit like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. You know what to do. I will be making a lot more of these videos. I know this is the first one that's come out, but there will be many more to come. So till then, take care and happy sculpting.